In the stillness of night, within a grand mansion in the United States, darkness enveloped every corner. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, and the luxurious surroundings felt oddly still. Christopher Reed, a hunter of national-level power, lay asleep in his bed. The quiet of the night was abruptly shattered when he suddenly woke up alert. Something had disturbed the tranquility. He threw off his blanket and got out of bed, his footsteps soft but deliberate as he made his way down a long, dimly lit hallway. As he moved, Christopher realized something unsettling. He could no longer sense the presence of any of the staff that usually filled the mansion. The eerie quietness only grew stronger, giving the mansion an abandoned, lifeless feel. The darkness around him seemed to press closer, creating an unnatural tension in the air. Christopher, filled with suspicion, grabbed a wine glass from a nearby table. He had to test the odd sensation creeping over him. With a swift motion, he threw the glass down the empty hall, watching as it soared through the air in a graceful arc. It hit the ground, shattering into countless tiny pieces. Yet there was no sound. The shards lay scattered, but the silence persisted, as if the world itself had muted around him. This was no ordinary silence. It was unnatural, and Christopher could feel it deep within him, a sense of danger he had never encountered before. Something impossible had just happened, leaving him more unsettled than ever. His instincts, honed through years of experience, warned him that a threat unlike any other was near. Christopher Reed's mind drifted back to a recent conversation he had with Lady Selner and the vice director of the Hunter Command Center. He vividly recalled the vice director's words, offering him a contact number for assistance. If ever he found himself in need, he could reach out, and Go Gun-hee, the chairman of the Korean Hunters Association, would get in touch. It left Christopher with a lingering thought. Had the vice director foreseen something like this happening? As these memories played in his mind, the silence of the mansion was suddenly broken by the appearance of a man with blonde hair. The intruder stood there, a calm smile on his face, one hand casually tucked into his pocket. He exuded an air of ease, far too relaxed for someone who had managed to infiltrate the home of a world-renowned S-rank hunter like Christopher Reed. Christopher's instincts sharpened further. This man wasn't alone. He could sense two more individuals hidden behind the walls surrounding him. There were 3 intruders in total. The blonde man spoke, his voice carrying an eerie, almost otherworldly tone. His words were strange, not directed at Christopher, but to something beyond. He mentioned a fragment of blue light and warned that no one would be saved if it continued to accommodate humans. The words were unsettling, and Christopher immediately recognized the language, something monstrous. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. What did this stranger mean? Was he addressing someone else entirely, someone connected to him? Before Christopher could respond, the man calmly raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. He wasn't talking to Christopher directly, but to some higher entity, someone above and connected to him. This only fueled Christopher's frustration, his anger boiling over. His voice echoed through the mansion, filled with fury. The intruder's dismissive attitude, as if Christopher were some joke, ignited a fire deep within him. In an instant, his eyes glowed, and flames erupted from his body. Christopher's form began to expand, his entire being consumed by blazing fire. Sparks crackled from his eyes, making him look like a raging god of fire. Determined, Christopher swore that at least one of the intruders would die by his hands. The 2 other figures, now fully revealed, watched with keen interest. They studied his transformation, intrigued by what they saw. A human capable of spiritualizing, something they found almost impossible. As Christopher's firestorm raged, it tore through the mansion, the sheer intensity melting the walls and floors around him. His determination to fight to the death had awakened, reminding him of the last time he felt this way, during his battle with Kamish. With flames still burning and the mansion crumbling, Christopher braced himself for the deadly fight ahead. Sung Jinwoo stepped into a sleek black sedan, accompanied by his guide, as they headed towards the airport. The city streets flew by in a blur, and as the car neared its destination, Jinwoo noticed the growing crowd waiting to greet him. It wasn't a small gathering. Thousands of people had gathered just to catch a glimpse of him before he left. The guide mentioned the overwhelming number of people there to see him, estimating over 100,000 had gathered. Jinwoo silently acknowledged that this would be his last day in Japan. It was a surreal moment, as the sheer size of the crowd showed the impact he had made during his time there. From within Jinwoo's shadow, Baru observed the scene, sensing the admiration from the masses. To Baru, this was a sign of respect, and he felt his king should acknowledge the people in return. But Jinwoo saw it differently. He wasn't one to bask in the attention or play into their expectations. As they entered the airport, Jinwoo disappeared from the view of the massive crowd. The people outside watched as his plane took off, marking the end of his time in Japan, though his presence still lingered in the hearts of many who had come to see him off. Once on board the plane, Jinwoo settled into his seat, his thoughts briefly wandering. He couldn't help but wonder about the odds of being seated next to someone familiar on a flight. His gaze shifted to the man beside him, Adam White. Jinwoo couldn't believe it was just a coincidence. Adam White, seemingly trying to ease the situation, admitted that while it would be nice if Jinwoo thought it was pure chance, he knew better. Jinwoo greeted Adam, recalling their previous encounter. Adam was surprised, as they had only met once, but Jinwoo remembered him well. With some amusement, Jinwoo noted that it had been Baru who reminded him of Adam's name. Within Jinwoo's shadow, Baru was as dutiful as ever. He insisted on ensuring his king didn't forget the man's name, urging Jinwoo not to mix it up. To Baru, even small details mattered when it came to preserving the reputation of a king, and he took his role seriously, even in such a minor situation. As the plane flew steadily through the sky, Jinwoo turned to Adam White, questioning why he was there. Jinwoo knew that the previous arrangement between them had been called off. Adam, fully aware that he was overstepping boundaries by meeting Jinwoo without notice, explained that he had an urgent matter to discuss. Jinwoo's thoughts immediately jumped to the worst. He asked if the US had also failed to stop an S-ranked gate, but Adam quickly reassured him that the situation with the gate had been handled without any problems. There was something else, something far more concerning. Adam took out his laptop and played a video for Jinwoo. The footage showed thick black smoke billowing up like from a massive wildfire. The flames were fierce, and the firefighters battling the blaze were clearly struggling. They shouted orders to each other, warning anyone nearby to stay back. The danger was real, and they were desperate for reinforcements. Jinwoo's attention sharpened as he watched the scene unfold. He asked Adam about the video, needing to know what he was looking at. Adam's answer was chilling. He explained that the man responsible for starting the fire was none other than Christopher Reed, one of the national-level hunters. Despite the mobilization of 1,800 firefighters and 14 top-level mage-type hunters, they had struggled to put out the flames Christopher had unleashed. Jinwoo, sensing something darker behind the scene, noted that for the fire to be so intense, there must have been a fierce battle. His concern grew as he asked about Christopher's fate. Adam's response was filled with sorrow. Christopher was already dead when they found him. It was hard to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. Adam White reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a set of photographs. He handed them to Sung Jinwoo. The shock was clear in Jinwoo's expression as he stared at the photo of the person the Hunter Bureau suspected was responsible for the recent events. Something about the image triggered an intense reaction in Jinwoo. Without warning, Jinwoo's expression darkened. Using ruler's authority, he curled his finger and dragged Adam's body toward him with invisible force. The tension in the cabin spiked as Jinwoo's words were filled with menace. If this was some kind of cruel joke, Jinwoo made it clear Adam would not leave the plane alive. Adam, visibly panicked, shouted for the others not to act. His plea wasn't directed at Jinwoo, but at the other hunters nearby, who had instinctively prepared to defend him. They stopped just short of engaging Jinwoo, realizing the danger of the situation. Struggling to breathe under the immense pressure of Jinwoo's power, Adam quickly explained the man in the photo had come out of a dungeon, and it might not be who Jinwoo thought. Jinwoo's mind raced. A dungeon? The possibility struck him as strange, and his grip on Adam loosened slightly, giving him a chance to catch his breath. Gasping, Adam continued, revealing that the energy the man emitted was similar to that of a monster, and that he had attacked S-rank hunters without warning. Adam reminded Jinwoo of the explosion incident at the Hunter Bureau's headquarters a few months ago, which had made headlines around the world. Jinwoo's thoughts sharpened, the pieces falling into place. Adam was implying that his father could have been involved in the event. The realization hit hard. Could it really be his father behind all of this? Jinwoo slowly deactivated his ruler's authority, releasing Adam from the invisible grip. As the tension in the cabin began to settle, Adam White struggled to catch his breath. With effort, Adam continued his explanation. He revealed that after the mysterious man had defeated their hunters, he vanished without a trace. The Hunter Bureau had conducted a secret search, but it seemed as though the man had disappeared into thin air. Adam understood the emotional impact this revelation would have on Jinwoo, yet the profile they had on the individual suggested he was the most likely culprit responsible for the recent events. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed as he processed the information, his mind sharp and calculating. He demanded to know why Adam had shown him the photograph. The situation was sensitive, and the implications were serious. Adam responded, explaining that it had to do with the upcoming International Guild Conference. This major event would bring together representatives from the world's leading guilds, and the American Hunter Bureau intended to issue a red notice for the man in the photograph. The investigation, which had been kept under wraps until now, would soon go public. The U.S. Hunter Association had lost one of their most valuable national-level hunters in this incident, and they were prepared to do everything in their power to catch the culprit. Adam emphasized that they wanted to maintain a good relationship with Jinwoo, which was why this private meeting had been arranged. They didn't want Jinwoo to be blindsided by the sight of his father's face appearing on screens during the conference, an event he was also invited to. This way, they could inform him beforehand and soften the shock. Jinwoo was deep in thought, struggling to process the revelation. His father, who had been missing for 10 years, had somehow returned, but as a monster? The thought unsettled him. Could it really be true? One of the hunters approached Adam White, concerned about his condition. Adam, still slightly shaken from the encounter with Jinwoo's power, assured the hunter that he was fine, though he admitted feeling a bit weak. As he observed Jinwoo, Adam couldn't help but be impressed. Telekinesis was a skill many high-tiered magic hunters could use, but their abilities were limited to simply moving objects. What Jinwoo had demonstrated was on a completely different level, something only national level hunters were typically capable of. It became clear to Adam that Jinwoo truly was the 6th national level hunter, a fact he knew he needed to report to the vice director. A few days later, the International Guild Conference was on the horizon, a significant event where the representative guilds of each nation would gather to discuss the future of the hunter profession. The U.S. Hunters Association released the invitation list, and it created a stir worldwide. Ahjin Guild, representing Korea, had been invited to participate. This caused a huge commotion, as it was no ordinary guild. In fact, the only high-ranking hunter in Ahjin Guild was its guildmaster, Sung Jinwoo. The news sparked intense debate and conversation around the world. The American Hunters Association had effectively announced that one hunter, Jinwoo, was superior to the countless guilds with numerous top-class hunters. This bold move highlighted Jinwoo's extraordinary strength and influence, making him a topic of global interest as the conference approached. With the excitement surrounding the upcoming International Guild Conference, one network sought an interview with Choi Jong-gin, the president of the Hunters Guild. The topic at hand was the recent announcement that Ahjin Guild, rather than the Hunters Guild, would be representing Korea at the prestigious event. The reporter began by addressing the surprising decision. The invitation to Ahjin Guild had become the center of attention, especially since many had expected the Hunters Guild to receive it. Curious about Choi Jong-gin's thoughts, the reporter asked for his opinion. Jong-gin calmly responded, stating that he believed the American Hunters Association had made an obvious choice. The reporter seemed surprised by his confidence and asked if Jong-gin truly thought it was so clear-cut. Without hesitation, Jong-gin confirmed that it was indeed an obvious decision. The reporter then raised another point, suggesting that Ahjin Guild was essentially a one-man show, given that Sung Jinwoo was its only high-ranking member. Jong-gin acknowledged this, but added that the key detail was who that one person was. It was Hunter Sung Jinwoo. He explained that if a guild member was defined by their combat ability, then Sung Jinwoo was equivalent to having hundreds of members. Jong-gin had witnessed Jinwoo's skills firsthand during multiple events, including the Jeju Island raid. He confidently stated that even when compared to the greatest guilds in the world, Ahjin Guild's strength would stand second to none. The reporter pressed further, hinting that the Hunters Guild, having represented Korea at the conference every year, might feel a sense of dissatisfaction about being replaced. Choi Jong-gin admitted that he was disappointed. He had already prepared for the trip, even renewing his passport and securing his visa. However, despite this, he felt more pride than disappointment. In a time when humanity faced an overwhelming threat from monsters, a hunter had appeared, one in whom he could place his unwavering trust. Choi Jong-gin mentioned that both he and his guild members had been saved by Sung Jinwoo in the past, and he felt genuinely proud that Sung Jinwoo had been selected to represent Korea at the conference. This decision, in his eyes, was a moment of pride for the country and a symbol of hope for all. After finishing his interview, Choi Jong-gin left the studio and made his way back to his office. There, one of his employees was already waiting for him with news. The employee reported that the guild had successfully reserved the gate in Suseo-dong, which had spawned earlier that morning. It was classified as an A-rank gate, but the readings didn't indicate anything particularly unusual. Jong-gin was pleased with the news, but he had another question on his mind. He asked whether Ahjin Guild had requested a reservation this time. The employee shook his head, mentioning that Ahjin Guild had remained unusually quiet in recent days. As Jongen mulled over this information, he couldn't help but reflect on the fact that it had been 4 days since Hunter Sung Jinwoo had returned from Japan. Despite his reputation as a formidable force in dungeon clearing, Jinwoo hadn't appeared at a single gate. While some of the large guilds in Seoul seemed to be quietly celebrating the lack of competition from Ahjin Guild, Jongen wasn't so quick to join them in their joy. He compared the situation to someone getting excited over a fallen apple. In his mind, those who celebrated Jinwoo's absence were no better than monkeys. The employee, however, pointed out that their guild's revenue had increased by 40% due to the lack of competition from Ahjin Guild. Jongen gave a sarcastic response, calling the employee a monkey under his breath, which confused the employee for a moment. Jongen's thoughts lingered on Jinwoo. He found it hard to believe that someone who had once cleared multiple lower-level gates in a single day, and who had often entered other guilds' gates after becoming an S rank, would suddenly become this quiet. Jinwoo had recently solved an S-rank dungeon break in Japan all by himself. To Jongen, there was no way someone of that caliber could simply disappear from the scene without reason. Something significant was happening behind the scenes, and Jongen was determined to figure out what it was. At the Hunter Association of Korea, there was a discussion unfolding regarding a recent request from China. Jim Chul reported to Gunhee that China had asked for information about Hunter Sung Jinwoo. At first, Gunhee was curious if they meant personal information, but Jim Chul clarified that it wasn't about private details. Instead, they had requested official and public information, such as Jinwoo's paid records and news articles related to him. Gunhee considered this for a moment, realizing that China wasn't expecting them to hand over sensitive data on a top-tier hunter like Sung Jinwoo. However, the sudden interest in Jinwoo puzzled him. Sung Jinwoo had made it clear that he wasn't interested in being scouted by any other country, so why this sudden attention? Jim Chul then revealed an intriguing detail. The request hadn't come from the Chinese government, but from an individual. When Gunhee asked who it was, Jim Chul explained that it was Liu Jigang, China's 7-star hunter, who had taken an interest in Jinwoo. This revelation surprised Gunhee. China didn't follow the standard world ranking system for hunters. Instead, they used their own unique classification, where 5 stars were typically the highest rank. However, Liu Jigang was the only exception to this system, being classified as a 7-star hunter, a title that no one else in the country held. The idea that someone as powerful as Liu Jigang had taken an interest in Jinwoo struck Gunhee. He knew that Liu had fought against a giant monster in the past, and it seemed that after hearing about Jinwoo's success and taking down all the giants in Japan, he had become intrigued by the Korean hunter's abilities. Gunhee silently reflected on this. There was a sense of mutual recognition between powerful hunters, a connection that only the strong could understand. However, despite Liu Jigang's interest, Gunhee made a firm decision. He instructed Jim Chul to deny the request. If necessary, they could provide some superficial information, but they weren't going to give away anything significant. At the Scavenger Guild, the atmosphere was tense as preparations were underway. Laura, keeping everyone informed, reminded Thomas Andre that Hunter Sung Jinwoo would be arriving in the country tomorrow. The realization hit Thomas. It was already happening. Jinwoo's arrival was imminent. After verifying Jinwoo's schedule, Thomas summoned Hwang Dong-soo to his office. When Dong-soo arrived, Thomas didn't waste any time. He had something urgent to say, and it couldn't wait. Looking at Dong-soo with seriousness, Thomas delivered a firm instruction. Dong-soo was not to lay a finger on Sung Jinwoo. The order was direct and left no room for misunderstanding. Dong-soo, shocked by how much Thomas seemed to know, couldn't hide the surprise on his face. Thomas, noticing the reaction, explained that he was fully aware of the events that had transpired between Sung Jinwoo and Dong-soo's brother. He understood Dong-soo's desire for closure, the lingering doubts and frustrations that had built up, but just as Dong-soo was about to protest, Thomas silenced him with a single gesture, wagging his finger. A small, knowing smirk appeared on his face, as if reminding Dong-soo who was in charge. Thomas had made it clear, this was not a conversation, it was a warning. From a distance, Laura observed the interaction. She could feel the tension in the room and understood the gravity of what was happening. She thought to herself that there weren't many people in the world who could give such a powerful warning to someone like Dong-soo, a top-ranked hunter. But Thomas was different, and his authority was unquestionable. Thomas's words were straightforward. Hwang Dong-soo was not to touch Sung Jinwoo under any circumstance. He was to remain distant and out of the way, even if it meant taking a vacation at the guild resort during the international conference. After a tense moment of silence, Hwang Dong-soo finally nodded, reluctantly agreeing to Thomas's demand. His stiff posture and clenched jaw betrayed his displeasure, but he knew better than to openly defy Thomas in this setting. With a terse acknowledgement, Hwang left the president's office, his departure accompanied by the heavy atmosphere of suppressed rage and frustration. It was as if a storm cloud hovered over his head, dark and foreboding. Despite his compliance, Laura could sense that Hwang had not truly given up on his grudge. His hatred for Sung Jinwoo burned too brightly to be extinguished by a single order, no matter how absolute. Laura turned her gaze back to Thomas. The situation was precarious, and she knew better than to assume that Hwang would simply obey. When she voiced her concern, Thomas didn't hesitate. He agreed. There was no way Hwang Dong-soo would back down so easily. Thomas instructed Laura to keep a close watch on Hwang until Sung Jinwoo left the United States. Despite agreeing to Thomas Andre's orders, Laura silently questioned his decision to let Hwang go. But Thomas, unshaken, made his stance clear without needing further words. Hwang's discomfort was a small price to pay for staying alive. As the world's best hunters arrived in the United States for the International Guild Conference, the atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation. Among the arrivals was Lennart Nierman, Germany's top hunter and the guild master of Richter Guild. Upon exiting the airport, Lennart was immediately struck by the large crowd of reporters waiting outside. His curiosity piqued. He turned to his vice guildmaster for an explanation. The vice guildmaster informed him that the Korean hunter everyone had been talking about was expected to arrive that day. Hearing this, Lennart acknowledged the significance of Jinwoo's presence. He was intrigued and saw an opportunity. There was nothing to lose by introducing himself to such a powerful hunter. Straightening his clothes, Lennart took a few confident steps toward Jinwoo's group, but suddenly a wave of realization stopped him in his tracks, sending a shock through his body. His gaze locked onto something that only he seemed to notice. His vice guild master, puzzled by Lennart's abrupt hesitation, asked if he was going to continue forward. Lennart, still in disbelief, muttered under his breath. He had initially thought that Jinwoo summoned his minions from another dimension, but now it was clear that they were with him all the time. The sheer number of shadows accompanying Jinwoo was overwhelming, giving the impression that he was prepared for battle, as if he had brought an entire army. To Lennart, it felt as if Jinwoo had come not just for the conference, but to wage war against the entire US. Jinho glanced around, noticing something. He asked Jinwoo if he saw someone familiar, but Jinwoo simply replied that a foreigner kept staring at him. Jinho, ever the observant one, teased that with all the media attention Jinwoo had received lately, it was no surprise that he had gained quite a few admirers. Jinho guessed, the man probably wanted an autograph or something. Turning his attention, Jinho then noticed Chief Woo standing nearby. Something about his demeanor seemed off. He looked unusually tense. Curious, Jinho inquired why Chief Woo was there, to which the chief, clearly flustered, awkwardly responded that he was in charge of guarding Hunter Sung. Amused, Jinho couldn't resist making a joke, getting closer and pretending not to hear properly. He repeated in mock disbelief, asking who exactly the chief thought he was protecting. Chief Woo's face turned as red as a tomato, embarrassed by the whole situation. Seeing this, Jinwoo gently placed a hand on Jinho's shoulder, signaling him to stop teasing. At that moment, they were greeted by Adam White, who had been waiting for Jinwoo. Adam mentioned how they had been expecting him, and made a lighthearted comment about how he used to be in charge of the Bureau's Asia branch, but now it seemed he had taken on the role of managing matters related to Jinwoo directly. With formalities exchanged, Adam announced that everyone except Jinwoo would be escorted to their rooms. Jinwoo, ever composed, instructed Jinho to head to the hotel with Chief Woo. Jinho, always obedient to his boss, simply nodded and followed along, leaving Jinwoo to handle the upcoming meeting. Adam White led Sung Jinwoo to a car, asking if he wouldn't mind coming along. Jinwoo immediately wondered if this had anything to do with his father. Adam reassured him, explaining that it wasn't about anything that would harm him. He reminded Jinwoo of the high regard the U.S. Hunters Bureau held for him. However, some of the matters they were about to discuss were classified as top secret. Adam remained vague, but mentioned they were heading to the Hunters Bureau headquarters. As they drove, Jinwoo took in the details of the situation. He noticed the tension in Adam's voice as he mentioned how much pressure the Bureau was under. The death of Christopher Reed, one of the United States' most powerful hunters, had left a significant gap in their combat strength. While the news of Christopher's death had not yet been revealed, Adam admitted that the country would soon be dedicating all its resources to finding someone capable of replacing him. Sung Jinwoo asked if he was one of the candidates, and Adam White nodded silently in response. Without further words, Adam pressed a button and a hologram appeared, displaying something remarkable. Adam explained the significance of rune stones, how their value was tied to the power of the monster from which they were extracted. He mentioned Kamish, the dragon, a creature from one of humanity's greatest calamities, a raid so devastating that people preferred to forget it. The rune stone from Kamish had been preserved, and now they were looking for someone worthy to inherit it. Adam looked directly at Jinwoo, presenting the offer with anticipation. However, Jinwoo's focus shifted. He wanted to see the previous images, specifically the photos of Kamish's corpse. Adam seemed surprised by the request, but Jinwoo insisted. When the image of Kamish's body appeared, it was clear that aside from the battle damage, the dragon's remains had been kept in surprisingly good condition. This piqued Jinwoo's interest deeply. He asked if the United States had stored Kamish's body intact. Adam, though hesitant, confirmed that the body was stored, but noted that he didn't have detailed information about its exact location. Jinwoo, determined, requested to visit it, pressing that after all the time he had given the Hunter's Bureau, this wasn't too much to ask. Adam, unsure but understanding the gravity of Jinwoo's request, agreed that if anyone could make it happen, it would be the higher authorities. He offered to report the request, but Jinwoo suggested they wait together. Adam White noticed Jinwoo's sudden interest and couldn't tell if it was something to be relieved about or concerned. Their car arrived at the Hunter's Bureau, and the news of Jinwoo's arrival quickly reached the director of the Hunter Command Center, David Brennan. His expression mirrored Adam's uncertainty when he heard the details. David asked if Jinwoo had mentioned anything about the runestone, clearly expecting it to be a focal point. Adam responded that the runestone had hardly been discussed throughout the day, which seemed to surprise the director. David, somewhat baffled, wondered aloud why Jinwoo seemed fixated solely on seeing the corpse of Kamish, the dragon. He decided he needed to consult with the deputy director and asked Adam to give them a moment. As David mulled over the situation, Connor, one of his trusted subordinates, speculated about Jinwoo's intentions. He pointed out that the value of skills extracted from runestones was immense, especially for top hunters. Hunters would spend vast amounts of money for skills because in their world, strength was equivalent to survival. But Connor suggested that perhaps for Jinwoo, the opportunity to see Kamish's corpse might be even more valuable than gaining a skill from a runestone. David, however, was puzzled. He recalled that Jinwoo's powers were connected to monsters he had killed himself. Connor, in a moment of realization, wondered if it was possible for Jinwoo to turn a long-dead creature like Kamish into one of his summons, even though Jinwoo hadn't killed it himself. The shock on Connor's face was evident as he grasped the implications. David, somewhat baffled, wondered aloud why Jinwoo seemed fixated solely on seeing the corpse of Kamish, the dragon. The idea hit David hard. If Jinwoo could turn Kamish into a summon, it would make him extraordinarily powerful, far beyond what any individual should be allowed to reach. This thought unsettled David. No single hunter should hold that much strength, yet Connor reminded him of the potential diplomatic consequences of denying Jinwoo's request. If they refused, maintaining a good relationship with him could become difficult. David weighed the situation carefully before finally making a decision. He tapped his foot as he considered the risks, but ultimately he saw it as an opportunity. He would take Jinwoo to see Kamish's corpse himself. It would allow him to observe Jinwoo's abilities firsthand and perhaps gather more insight into the true extent of his power. Jinwoo was escorted by director David Brennan into the elevator. Though David tried to engage Jinwoo in conversation, offering to talk things through further, it was clear that Jinwoo had a singular focus in mind. He remained quiet, his thoughts racing as he considered their destination. He found it hard to believe that the headquarters of the Hunter Command Center had been built right on the spot where the mighty dragon Kamish had been slain. As the elevator arrived at the underground floor, there was a distinct ding, signaling their arrival. David gestured for Jinwoo to follow him, revealing a long hallway that led toward an armored entrance. As they walked, Jinwoo's senses heightened. The cold, sharp air stung his skin as they approached the entrance, and Jinwoo's curiosity deepened. For the magic energy to still be detectable after 8 years was astonishing. He wondered just how powerful Kamish would be if it were to be turned into a shadow soldier. As they stepped inside, Jinwoo was struck by the sight that lay before him. The enormous lair was brightly lit, showcasing the form of Kamish, the red dragon. Even after all this time, Kamish remained untouched, preserved in its final state of defeat. The dragon's sheer size and imposing figure left Jinwoo momentarily breathless. David explained to Jinwoo how they had managed to preserve Kamish's body intact, just as it had been after taking the lives of hundreds of elite hunters. It had only been stopped by the combined effort of 5 remaining national level hunters. He also also revealed that the energy powering the Hunters Association headquarters was supplied by Kamish's mana crystal, a testament to the dragon's immense power. With a tone of finality, David asked if Jinwoo was satisfied with what he saw. Jinwoo, however, had other plans. He asked David and the others to stand back, preparing to attempt something extraordinary. His calm yet commanding presence made the staff uneasy. They began voicing their concerns, unsure if it was truly safe to allow this to happen, but David reassured them, reminding them that he had given Jinwoo permission and urged them all to observe what would unfold. Without hesitation, Jinwoo raised his hand toward the enormous red dragon and with a quiet command whispered, "Arise." Dark shadows began swirling in the air, descending toward Kamish's body. A notification appeared in Jinwoo's mind. Shadow extraction had failed. Despite the setback, Jinwoo remained composed. He still had 2 attempts left. He focused his energy and tried again, his desire to control this legendary beast growing stronger with each passing second. As he commanded, "Arise!" Once more, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The lights above flickered as a cold, unnatural wind swept through the chamber. Then, out of nowhere, a deafening roar echoed through the room. It was a dragon's roar, so powerful that everyone instinctively covered their ears in an attempt to block out the terrifying sound. Panic filled the room as the dragon's presence seemed to momentarily return. Kamish's shadow responded to his will, and the attempt to bring the mighty dragon under his control was not over yet. The massive red dragon, Kamish, paused as it spotted the human standing at its feet. Its enormous eyes gleamed with recognition. The dragon, summoned from the depths of darkness, spoke with a voice that echoed through the room. It identified the figure before it, the Shadow Monarch, the King of the Dead. Meanwhile, David, the director of the Hunter Command Center, stood frozen in shock. He could hardly comprehend what he was witnessing. Fear and confusion washed over him as the monstrous dragon spoke. Its enormous eyes now turned toward the humans behind Jinwoo. The faces of the staff and guards were filled with terror as they stared back, their mouths agape, unable to believe what was unfolding before them. Kamish's voice rumbled again, this time filled with rage. The dragon's murderous intent filled the air as it vowed to kill every human in sight. The lair, built to contain a sleeping dragon, now seemed much too small to hold the awakened beast, splitting the concrete with its sheer size. David, still watching in terror, realized just how dangerous the situation had become. He observed the reinforced glass walls of the lair, which had been imbued with top-ranker mana, shatter under the force of the dragon's roar. The sound of glass exploding echoed through the facility as shards flew everywhere. The entire structure shook violently. Kamish's mouth began to glow as it prepared to unleash its most devastating attack, its infamous dragon breath. David, bracing himself, felt the overwhelming sense of dread that came with knowing what was about to happen. The staff around him panicked, urging him to evacuate, but David could only stand there, realizing the futility of escape. He knew that there was nowhere they could run to escape Kamish's deadly flames. As the dragon prepared to release its fiery attack, its voice boomed with a single horrifying word, "Die." But before Kamish could carry out its deadly intent, a powerful voice cut through the chaos. Jinwoo, with authority and power, bellowed a single word, "Enough!" He informed the dragon that the mana crystal once embedded in its head had long since been removed. Kamish no longer needed to obey the commands of the rulers. There was no reason to follow their orders anymore. From a distance, Adam White could hardly believe what he was witnessing. He questioned in disbelief if Hunter Sung Jinwoo was really speaking the language of monsters. Beside him, Connor, equally astonished, could not find the words to explain what he was seeing, even though it was unfolding right in front of his eyes. Kamish, the enormous dragon, responded to Jinwoo, acknowledging how it felt to become a subject of the Shadow Monarch. Its fierce nature softened as it lowered itself in respect, showing its submission to its new king. Kamish, who once served the King of Dragons, now greeted Jinwoo as its new master. Jinwoo, maintaining his composure, slowly approached the towering dragon. His hand rested gently on Kamish's snout. He asked if Kamish truly served the King of Dragons. The dragon confirmed, stating that it had served the King of Mad Dragons, known as the Monarch of Destruction. Jinwoo, deep in thought, observed the immense rage still lingering in Kamish. It was astonishing to him that a shadow soldier could possess such a strong and independent will. Kamish's presence surpassed any monster Jinwoo had encountered so far. There was no doubt in Jinwoo's mind that Kamish had been an incredible being in its former life. As Jinwoo processed these thoughts, Kamish, now more docile, wagged its massive tail in a display of loyalty and contentment. Adam and Connor, still standing at a distance, could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Their eyes were wide and their jaws dropped in disbelief. Jinwoo stood in silence, thinking about what Kamish had revealed. He recalled the 9 monarchs that the system had shown him before. There was the King of the Dead, known as the Shadow Monarch, and the King of the Giants, called the Monarch of the Beginning. It seemed Kamish served yet another one of these powerful beings. However, Kamish, sensing its own end, informed Jinwoo that their time together was short. The dragon explained that it had been trapped in the abyss for too long, and now its magic power was fading. Kamish's body began to disintegrate, its energy too weak to survive after 8 long years. Jinwoo, in disbelief, questioned whether even his power as the Shadow Monarch was unable to reverse the passage of time. Desperate, Jinwoo called out to the system for aid. His mind raced, seeking a solution, but the system remained silent. Kamish's voice grew weaker as it faded, expressing envy towards Jinwoo's shadow soldiers who could serve their master for eternity. With a final warning, the dragon cautioned Jinwoo about 4 humans who had borrowed the strength of the rulers, urging him to be wary of them. As Kamish's massive form dissolved into nothingness, its voice became fainter and fainter, until it was barely a whisper. The once mighty dragon, who had briefly recognized Jinwoo as its new king, vanished completely. Jinwoo stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the empty space where Kamish's shadow once loomed, lost in thought. Finally, a notification from the system appeared before him. Shadow extraction has failed. Jinwoo walked away from the scene, frustration building inside him. He called out to Adam as he left, telling him to inform the director of his deep apologies and that he would cover the expenses for any damage caused. Adam acknowledged his request, and the onlookers could only watch in silence as Jinwoo made his way through the door. The weight of disappointment was heavy on Jinwoo. His fist clenched tightly, and in a burst of anger, he struck the wall with force. The impact was so strong that for a moment, the entire building seemed to shake. Arriving at the hotel, Jinwoo felt drained and decided to rest. He was just about to head up to his room when Jimchul entered the lobby, spotting him. Jimchul approached quickly, expressing his concern. He mentioned that they had been trying to reach Jinwoo, but all attempts had failed. Jinwoo, still weary from the day, explained that he had been in a place where no calls could get through. Jimchul then inquired if Jinwoo had met with Jinho. Confused, Jinwoo asked what he meant. Jimchul revealed that Jinho had left after receiving a message, supposedly from Jinwoo, saying that he was waiting for him at the Hunters Bureau headquarters. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. He had just come from the Hunters Bureau and had never sent such a message. Adam, overhearing the conversation, confirmed that Jinho's name wasn't on the visitor's log. His face showed concern as he recalled that a hunter from the Scavenger Guild had picked Jinho up 2 hours earlier. Though the Scavenger Guild had ties with the Hunters Bureau, they did not have the authority to act on their behalf. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Adam suggested that contacting the Scavenger Guild directly would be the fastest way to get answers. Adam quickly contacted the Scavenger Guild, his voice tense as he relayed the situation. Meanwhile, Jinwoo couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Something felt off, and his instincts were telling him this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. At the Scavenger Guild, Laura received the call. Her expression changed the moment she understood what Adam was telling her. Someone from their guild had escorted Jinho, the vice leader of Ahjin Guild, away. The realization hit her hard, and her eyes widened in shock. She asked Adam if Hunter Sung Jinwoo was aware of this. Adam, still trying to make sense of it all, replied that Jinwoo didn't know yet, explaining that he had just inquired about Jinho while Jinwoo was still at the Hunters Bureau. Laura immediately understood the gravity of the situation and promised to find out what had happened as quickly as possible. Adam hurriedly informed Jinwoo that the Scavenger Guild was looking into the matter and would get in touch soon. But by the time Adam looked up, Jinwoo was gone. The Korean hunter had vanished, moving with a speed that left no trace behind. Jinwoo was furious. Whoever was responsible for this had chosen the worst possible time to provoke him. Leaping to the top of a nearby building, Jinwoo's mind raced. He berated himself for being careless. He hadn't placed anyone to guard Jinho, especially after using Shadow Exchange to save President Myunghan's life a while ago. The memory of the incident at Gina's school flashed in his mind, a reminder of the danger that could strike unexpectedly. Fear for Jinho's safety surged through him. If something similar were to happen again, Jinwoo couldn't bear the thought. Without hesitation, he gave a command to his shadow soldiers. Find him. Thousands of shadows erupted from beneath Jinwoo's feet, spreading in all directions. Like a vast army, they moved swiftly, searching for any trace of Jinho's mana. It was only a matter of time before they found him. Thomas entered the condo, his expression cold and unreadable. The scene before him was a mess. Hunters he had ordered to keep an eye on Hwang Dong-soo were now unconscious, lying on the floor. But Dong-soo himself was nowhere to be found. The weight of the situation hit Thomas hard as he stood in silence, surveying the chaos. Slowly, he removed his trademark sunglasses, the calm in his movements hiding the fury building inside him. Without a second thought, he crushed the sunglasses in his fist, the broken pieces falling to the floor. His anger was barely contained. Hwang Dong-soo had crossed the line. Thomas gritted his teeth, seething with frustration. He knew that time was running out, and Sung Jinwoo would be searching too. Turning to his hunters, he gave a firm, urgent order. They had to find Dong-soo, and they had to do it before Jinwoo did. No matter what, they had to reach him first. There was no room for error now. Jinwoo stood on the roof of a tall building, scanning the city below. His enhanced eyesight, thanks to his high perception, allowed him to take in every detail, from the bustling streets nearby to the distant residential areas. The city's noise was overwhelming, a mix of car horns, TV broadcasts, casual conversations, and even the sound of water splashing in bathrooms, but Jinwoo focused through it all. His thoughts raced. Could Jinho have left the city? It didn't seem possible. Jinho, a combat-type D-rank hunter, wouldn't be an easy target, not even for a group of regular people. If a car, supposedly heading for the Hunter Bureau headquarters, suddenly changed course, Jinho would have noticed something was off and resisted. The only clue they had so far was the mention of the Scavenger Guild. Jinwoo's mind raced back to the reason behind Jinho's abduction, Hwang Dong-soo. Dong-soo had likely been waiting for this moment, anticipating Jinwoo and Jinho's arrival in America. He wanted answers about his brother Hwang Dong-sook's death. Jinwoo and Jinho had been the only survivors of that dungeon, and Dong-soo must believe they were responsible for his brother's death. Jinwoo couldn't help but remember the warning from Woo Jim-chol back then. It had come true after all. Though Jinwoo had no regrets about what happened in that dungeon, he couldn't shake the thought that this situation could have been avoided if he had left a guard with Jinho. The possibility that something could happen to Jinho made his eyes burn with intensity. Dong-soo had truly crossed the line this time, and the Scavenger Guild was on high alert. The tension was palpable, with everyone waiting for any news. Thomas, deep in thought, couldn't help but wonder what was going on in Dong-soo's mind. Could he really be unafraid of death? Thomas knew better. Dong-soo was an S-rank hunter, fully aware of the massive difference in strength between himself and Sung Jinwoo. The fact that he still chose to act recklessly meant one thing. He was counting on Thomas to intervene on his behalf. Thomas realized he might have been too lenient with his hunters. The ringing phone snapped him out of his thoughts, and he quickly answered. Laura was on the other end, providing a crucial update. With the help of the Hunter Bureau, Laura explained they had tracked Dong-soo's movements over the past month. 3 times Dong-soo had deviated from his normal routine. Thomas wasted no time and ordered all available guild members to those locations. He himself was ready to move out as well. Before hanging up, Thomas hesitated. He asked Laura how she had managed to convince the Hunter Bureau to cooperate so quickly. Laura revealed that she had warned them if Dong-soo wasn't found, a clash between Thomas Andre and Sung Jinwoo was inevitable. Meanwhile, Adam informed the others that every member of the Scavenger Guild was mobilizing. All scheduled raids had been canceled, and all hunters were now moving. Connor, hearing this, realized the severity of the situation. The fact that all Scavenger Guild members were in motion meant that Thomas Andre was personally involved. This was no small matter. Something big was happening, and the whole guild was moving to handle it. In an abandoned factory in the United States, a concerned man stood over Yoo Jinho's unconscious body, his face filled with unease. Jinho lay on the cold floor, bruised and battered. The man asked Dong-soo if this was really okay, his eyes full of worry. Dong-soo, standing nearby, looked down at Jinho, his expression indifferent. He wasn't planning to kill Jinho. There was only one thing he wanted, to get answers. Master Thomas had warned him not to provoke Sung Jinwoo, but Dong-soo never had any intention of confronting Jinwoo directly. Instead, he sought answers from someone else, Jinho. If Jinho could tell him what really happened in that dungeon where his brother had died, Dong-soo would let him go unharmed. There was only one truth he wanted to hear, that Sung Jinwoo had killed his brother. Once Jinho confirmed it, Dong-soo would be done with him. Without hesitation, Dong-soo slapped Jinho hard across the face, trying to wake him. When that didn't work, he slammed his fist into Jinho's already bruised ribs. The impact forced Jinho awake, and a scream of pain erupted from him as blood poured from his mouth. A healer, observing from the side, remarked on Jinho's resilience, noting that any ordinary person would have died from the injuries by now. Jinho's strength as a tanker was apparent, but Dong-soo seemed unimpressed. Dong-soo couldn't understand why Jinho was being so stubborn. To him, Jinho's naive appearance didn't match his incredible endurance. While he could respect courage, Dong-soo believed that this level of stubbornness wouldn't grant Jinho any forgiveness. Dong-soo's expression remained cold and emotionless as he grabbed Yoo Jinho by the hair, forcefully pulling his head up. Jinho was barely conscious, his body weak from the relentless beating. Dong-soo, unfazed by Jinho's state, spoke calmly but with an underlying menace. He had no intention of killing Jinho. The man smirking behind him was a skilled healer, and he would heal Jinho every time he was on the brink of death. This meant that Jinho would be trapped in a cycle of endless torture, suffering over and over until he finally gave Dong-soo the answers he wanted. Dong-soo looked around the abandoned factory, noting how it had been closed for over 5 years. It was completely isolated, and no one would come to Jinho's rescue, no matter how much he screamed. With a cold edge to his voice, Dong-soo asked if this situation made Jinho want to talk now. Jinho's lips moved slightly, but Dong-soo couldn't make out the words. He leaned in closer, trying to hear what Jinho was saying. In a barely audible whisper, Jinho mustered the strength to respond. With defiance in his voice, he quietly cursed Dong-soo and raised his middle finger. Dong-soo's anger surged as he slammed Jinho's head into the ground, the brutal sound echoing through the abandoned factory. Jinho's body went limp again, completely drained from the relentless torture. The concerned man nearby couldn't hide his worry. He reminded Dong-soo to be cautious, not wanting to deal with the consequences of a murder, especially for money. Dong-soo, barely acknowledging the warning, replied that he would be mindful of it, but his focus remained on his cruel task. Another man, uneasy with the situation, tried to persuade Dong-soo to stop, saying they had pushed Jinho enough. Dong-soo, however, had no intention of stopping. He was just getting started, and a sinister smile spread across his face, revealing how much he resembled his equally cruel older brother. As Dong-soo continued, something on the far side of the factory caught his eye. His gaze shifted, and he noticed a high orc standing there, clad in black armor. Confused, Dong-soo wondered if there had been a dungeon break nearby. The presence of the orc was strange enough, but what was even more unusual was its behavior. The creature was trembling in fear, its face twisted in terror, as if it was barely holding itself together. The healer beside Dong-soo commented that the beast seemed to be afraid of him. Dong-soo glanced at the orc but remained unimpressed. He didn't have time for this distraction. A white glow enveloped his fist as he approached the orc, prepared to strike it down, but before he could land a blow, a deep voice suddenly filled the air, calm and commanding. "Exchange." The television filled with updates on the growing number of dangerous events happening across the world. Kyung-hee, watching the screen, couldn't help but voice her concern aloud, wondering how Jinwoo was doing amidst all this chaos. In the shadows, Baru, ever vigilant and guarding her under Jinwoo's orders, heard her question. Baru, with unwavering loyalty, silently reassured himself that if there were anything their king couldn't handle, no one in the world would be safe from it. The news shifted to a report about a conference organized by the U.S. Hunter Bureau. Kyung-hee pointed to the screen, showing Gina her brother appearing on the broadcast. Gina's attention immediately focused on the TV, eager to see him. At the same time, Baru's eyes lit up, filled with admiration as he gazed at the image of his king on the screen. However, a sudden unsettling sensation swept through Baru. His body trembled involuntarily as a familiar, powerful feeling overcame him. He had experienced this once before, the unmistakable feeling of Jinwoo's deep anger. The king was enraged, and it sent chills down Baru's spine. Meanwhile, in the city of Busan, the Knights Guild was busy preparing for an upcoming raid. Guildmaster Jong-soo stood before his team, reminding everyone of the increasing accidents happening in dungeons lately. His voice was firm as he urged the hunters to be careful and to ensure a successful, casualty-free raid. The hunters responded in unison, ready for the mission, but Yoon-tae seemed distracted, suddenly exclaiming as something caught his attention. Jong-soo quickly turned to him, asking what was wrong. Yoon-tae, clearly shaken, tried to explain that the shadows beneath Jong-soo's feet had started trembling, as if they were alive. Jong-soo, skeptical, jokingly accused Yoon-tae of drinking before the raid, something he had warned him against multiple times. Yoon-tae, adamant, insisted that he hadn't touched a drop, and that what he saw was real. Despite Yoon-tae's pleas, Jong-soo dismissed his concerns, suggesting that he take a break for the day, but Yoon-tae remained desperate, trying to make his guildmaster understand that something strange was happening. Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. Without hesitation, he shouted for the car to stop. The driver, confused, hesitated for a moment before Thomas screamed again, his frustration mounting. The situation had already escalated, and there was no time to waste. In his frustration, Thomas kicked the car door open with immense force, sending it flying through the air. He didn't bother waiting for the vehicle to come to a complete stop, jumping out as it still moved. He quickly shouted back to the hunters in the car, telling them to follow as fast as they could. good. With a powerful leap, Thomas was gone in an instant, smashing through everything in his path with incredible speed and strength. The hunters left behind exchanged glances, knowing all too well what was coming next. They joked bitterly about the flood of damage compensation invoices they would be dealing with again, thinking that maybe Thomas should have just stayed in the car to avoid wrecking the area. Bam! Without a word, Jinwoo's fist connected with Dong-su's torso, the force of the punch causing a shockwave to ripple through the air. The two men who had been standing beside Jinho immediately panicked, scrambling in fear as Jinwoo's power became clear. Jinho, barely conscious, managed to look up with relief. His vision was blurred, but he could make out the form of Jinwoo standing before him, a wave of safety washing over him. Blood spewed from Dong-su's mouth as the punch sent him flying across the factory, his body crashing into the opposite side with tremendous force. The sound of impact echoed, shaking the factory walls. Jinwoo stood where he had struck Dong-su, his eyes filled with fury. His rage was palpable, the air around him seeming to thicken with the intensity of his anger. Jinwoo carefully took a healing potion from his inventory, gently pouring it into Jinho's mouth, hoping to bring his friend back from the edge of death. But as he waited, a notification appeared, reminding him that healing potions could not restore health when it fell below 10% of a person's total HP. Frustration boiled inside Jinwoo as the empty potion bottle shattered in his grip. He needed another way to save Jinho, but time was running out. He turned his gaze to the two men nearby, scanning them for any hope of help. Jinwoo asked if either of them was a healer and demanded they heal Jinho. One of the men, clearly nervous, stammered out an excuse, claiming he didn't understand Korean. Dong-su, who had just regained his composure after being hit by Jinwoo, spoke up. He translated Jinwoo's demand, introducing himself casually as if this was a chance meeting with Jinwoo, but Jinwoo wasn't interested in pleasantries. He ignored Dong-su and repeated his order to the men, his voice filled with deadly seriousness. This was their last chance. One of the men, who appeared to be the healer, smirked arrogantly, suggesting Jinwoo should convince his boss, Dong-su, first before asking for his help. That was all it took. In a flash, Jinwoo slammed the healer's head into the ground with incredible speed. No one saw him move. It happened so quickly that the man didn't have a chance to react. Jinwoo then shifted his gaze to the other man, his patience wearing thin. He asked again if the man could use healing magic, but before the man could fully explain himself, his head was also knocked down into the hard floor. Within seconds, two high-ranking hunters were rendered unconscious by Jinwoo's unseen force, leaving the factory silent except for the sound of Jinho's labored breathing. Dong-su walked closer to Jinwoo, his eyes filled with anger and suspicion. His voice was laced with accusation as he confronted Jinwoo, demanding to know if he had killed his brother and the rest of his teammates. Jinho, having just regained consciousness, weakly tried to warn Jinwoo. He murmured, mentioning Dong-su's name and that he was Hwang Dong-suk's younger brother. Jinwoo quickly told Jinho not to speak anymore, his attention fixed on Dong-su. Dong-su's voice boomed with anger as he demanded Jinwoo to answer if he was responsible for his brother's death. Jinwoo's gaze grew cold, and instead of giving a direct answer, he told Dong-su to go and ask his brother himself. Dong-su, filled with rage, swung his fist at Jinwoo. His hand glowed with power, aiming straight for Jinwoo's face, but Jinwoo easily ducked under the blow and countered with a punch to Dong-su's stomach. The impact was immediate. Dong-su coughed up blood, his body flying across the room from the sheer force of Jinwoo's attack. He crashed into the pipes with a deafening thud, his body slamming hard against the cold metal. Gasping for breath, Dong-su struggled to comprehend the overwhelming strength of Jinwoo. His mind raced in denial, but his body flinched in fear. Before he could recover, Jinwoo was already crouched low, right on top of him, his presence menacing and unstoppable. Dong-su's agonized screams filled the factory as Jinwoo's fist came crashing down on his head, the brutal force echoing through the empty space. Blood splattered across the floor, and Jinwoo's grip tightened around Dong-su's head, his immense strength crushing any remaining resistance from Dong-su's broken body. Suddenly, with a loud boom, part of the factory's roof collapsed as Thomas Andre landed on the ground like a superhero, his powerful presence shaking the area. His eyes immediately locked on the scene before him. Thomas demanded Jinwoo to stop. He reminded Dong-su that he had warned him not to touch Jinwoo, and now, seeing Dong-su bloodied and barely conscious, he asked if Dong-su was still alive. Jinwoo, still gripping Dong-su's head, coldly replied, "For now." Thomas, hoping to avoid further conflict, said that if Jinwoo let Dong-soo go, he would overlook what had happened. But Jinwoo, unmoved by the offer, shifted his gaze toward Thomas and asked what would happen if he refused. Thomas, baring his teeth, warned that the request would no longer be a negotiation. Dong-soo, bloodied and bruised, seized the moment. His voice, weak yet filled with malice, urged Thomas to kill Jinwoo in his place, pushing him to interfere and finish what he could not. Jinwoo, without hesitation, smashed Dong-soo one final time, knocking him out cold. Dong-soo's limp body was thrown aside, completely lifeless in appearance. Jinwoo then turned his attention back to Thomas, his expression fearless, and simply said, "Fine by me." The tension between Jinwoo and Thomas Andre reached its peak. Thomas, towering and confident, spoke with authority, questioning if Jinwoo truly knew who he was, but Jinwoo's cold gaze remained unfazed, as he made it clear that it didn't matter who Thomas was. Thomas observed Jinwoo's fearlessness, realizing that Jinwoo knew exactly who he was, yet was still unbothered. It was something Thomas hadn't experienced in a long time. Thomas Andre came from humble beginnings, growing up in a poor immigrant family, surrounded by enemies, but he had been granted a gift that set him apart: overwhelming violence. His raw power allowed him to dominate anyone who stood in his way. Through countless battles, he honed this ability, proving his strength time and time again. Violence had become his justice. Those who opposed him were destroyed, and those who looked down on him were forced to kneel. With strength, authority, and wealth at his command, he reigned like a king, seeing violence as the ultimate power. And now Thomas knew how to deal with those who refused to submit to him. Time seemed to stop as Thomas leaped toward Jinwoo. His voice boomed as he charged, telling Jinwoo to blame his ignorance for what was about to happen. Suddenly, the hunters from the Scavenger Guild arrived, just in time to witness the chaos. Something massive crashed through the side of the abandoned factory with lightning speed, shattering the wall and sending debris flying. The impact shook the ground, and the object skidded across the floor, finally coming to a stop right in front of the shocked hunters. The sight left them speechless, unable to comprehend the sheer force they had just witnessed. The scene shifted as the hunters from the Scavenger Guild rushed to their guildmaster's side, their voices filled with concern. They called out to Thomas, asking if he was all right, but Thomas raised his hand, signaling for silence. His expression was dark, his rage barely contained as he surveyed the situation. Without a word, he stormed back toward the abandoned factory, his anger simmering beneath the surface. The Vice Guild Master, shaken by the intensity of the moment, snapped at the other guild members, urging them into action. They scrambled to follow his orders, knowing the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Jinwoo summoned his shadow soldiers. Kaisel, the shadowy winged wyvern, and Igris, the loyal knight, appeared at his side. Igris moved carefully, picking up Jinho with great care. Jinwoo's command was clear. Jinho needed immediate help. He ordered Igris to take Jinho to the nearest hospital, ensuring that they did everything possible to save him. Igris bowed in acknowledgement, then mounted Kaisel, and the two disappeared into the sky, leaving the place behind. As Jinwoo prepared for what was to come, Thomas's guildmates arrived in full force. They numbered around 100, every single elite hunter from the Scavenger Guild, the most powerful guild in the world. They flooded the place, ready to fight. Jinwoo responded by summoning more of his shadow soldiers. Darkness spread from beneath his feet, and one by one, his soldiers emerged, ready to stand by his side. The battlefield filled with an eerie atmosphere as the battle lines were drawn. Thomas's eyes lit up with delight. For the first time in a long while, he saw opponents worthy of his strength. The matter with Hwang Dong-soo no longer concerned him. His only focus now was on redeeming his pride, and there was only one way to do that: to defeat Jinwoo in battle. The tension between Thomas and Jinwoo reached its peak as Thomas gave one final offer. He urged Jinwoo to admit his mistakes, back off, and apologize. In return, Thomas promised to spare his life, but Jinwoo's response was nothing but defiance. Without a word, he raised his middle finger. Thomas's fury exploded, his teeth clenched in anger as he glared at Jinwoo. How dare someone stand up to him in such a manner? Fueled by rage, Thomas ripped off his shirt, revealing his massive, bulging muscles. His body began to transform, the muscles hardening into what seemed like armor, and a terrifying energy surged beneath his feet. His aura became overwhelming, signaling his full strength. As Thomas stood tall, ready for battle, his elite forces gathered behind him, prepared to follow their leader. On the other side, Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, led by Iron, were poised for the attack. Without hesitation, Jinwoo gave the order: advance. His soldiers, loyal and fearless, responded immediately, charging forward in unison. The hunters from Thomas's Scavenger Guild sprang into action, raising their shields high. Their magical energy infused the shields, creating a glowing golden barrier in front of them. The hunters formed a solid defensive massive wall, bracing for the inevitable clash. But Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, swift and relentless, surged toward the barrier without slowing down. The horde of nearly 1,000 shadows met the 100 elite hunters head-on. The battlefield shook with the sheer power of the clash between Jinwoo's shadow soldiers and Thomas's elite hunters. The ground trembled beneath them as shockwaves rippled through the air. In the midst of the chaos, Thomas Andre pierced through the horde of shadow soldiers with incredible speed, his sights set on Jinwoo. As Thomas charged forward, Tusk appeared in his path. The massive shadow creature enlarged himself, spreading his hands wide to cast Hymn of Protection, summoning a magical barrier. But Thomas, undeterred, stomped the ground with immense force and leaped into the air. With terrifying strength, he grabbed Tusk's head and in one swift motion ripped it off. He landed on the roof of the factory, crashing straight through it and descending into the building with a deafening boom. Thomas surveyed the scene below him with a deep frown. His hunters were struggling, overwhelmed by Jinwoo's shadow soldiers. The scavenger guild was being decimated before his eyes, their elite members no match for the relentless onslaught of darkness. Jinwoo stood amidst the chaos, his presence commanding and calm. He shifted his gaze toward Thomas, who wasted no time and charged forward again. Moving with lightning speed, he thrust Iron aside, breaking through the front line of shadow soldiers, all while searching for Jinwoo. Suddenly, from one side, someone approached at an incredible pace. Thomas turned, but it was too late. In an instant, Jinwoo struck, thrusting the Demon Monarch's dagger toward Thomas's waist, but the weapon, sharp and deadly, couldn't pierce Thomas's hardened skin. Jinwoo's eyes widened in surprise at the resistance of his opponent. Without hesitation, Thomas retaliated. His fist shot forward with tremendous force, slamming into Jinwoo. The impact was so strong that Jinwoo was sent flying, crashing upward due to the sheer power of Thomas's blow. Thomas grinned, his confidence unwavering. He mocked Jinwoo, questioning whether the younger hunter dared look down on a national-level hunter. Suddenly, a powerful gravitational force surged from Thomas, pulling Jinwoo back toward him as if gripped by an invisible fist. Jinwoo's eyes widened in surprise as he realized what was happening. Psychokinesis. Thomas outstretched his hand, boasting that Jinwoo should feel the difference in their strengths and despair. The distance between the two closed rapidly, with Jinwoo being dragged toward Thomas. But Jinwoo wasn't one to surrender easily. He activated Ruler's authority. With a tremendous force, Jinwoo slammed down on Thomas, causing the massive hunter's shoulders to strain under the pressure. Thomas, shocked, realized that Jinwoo wasn't simply trying to resist being pulled toward him. He was fighting back, fixing him in place with that mysterious power. Even as Jinwoo was dragged toward him, he chose to attack. Seizing the moment, Jinwoo delivered a powerful punch straight to Thomas's face. The impact was explosive, and for the first time in his career as a hunter, the man known as Goliath bled. Blood trickled from Thomas's lip, torn open by Jinwoo's punch, and he staggered backward in shock, reeling from the unexpected blow. Jinwoo didn't let up. With lightning speed, he dashed forward, his hand coiled back, ready to strike again. As he closed in, his voice echoed with mockery, asking what Thomas had said earlier about feeling the difference in their strengths and despairing. In a blur of motion, Jinwoo unleashed a flurry of punches, each one landing with precision and force. Thomas, stunned and astounded, could barely react under the relentless onslaught. Thomas, battered and bruised from Jinwoo's relentless assault, finally admitted to himself that he could no longer underestimate his opponent. His golden eyes flared with intensity as he called out reinforcement, a technique that caused his already massive muscles to swell even further. His towering figure grew beyond 3 meters tall, an imposing sight as raw power coursed through him. With a roar, he unleashed his newfound strength. Meanwhile, the Hunter Command Center was on high alert. A convoy of vehicles carried hunters racing toward the battlefield, following the path of the Scavenger Guild members. Inside one of the vehicles, an S-rank hunter demanded answers from Adam White, his impatience growing. Adam, focused on the task at hand, quickly replied that there was no time to explain the details, urgency clear in his voice. The other hunter, sensing the danger ahead, warned that they were getting too close to a life-threatening situation. Back at the scene of the fight, Jinwoo's thoughts raced. He realized that 4 humans had borrowed the power of the rulers, those who survived the Kamish raid. Among them were the national-level hunters, and Thomas Andre was one of them. Jinwoo's instincts screamed danger as he faced the colossal hunter. His intuition had never failed him in a crisis, and once again, it urged him to act. Just in time, Jinwoo skidded to a halt and leaped back, narrowly avoiding the devastating attack from Thomas. The giant's fist slammed into the ground with a force so immense that it sent shockwaves rippling outward. The impact was overwhelming, shattering everything within its radius. The skill, known as Demolish, demonstrated Thomas's terrifying strength as debris rained down like shards of glass. Jinwoo stepped further back, realizing that even from a safe distance, the destructive power Thomas wielded was astonishing. He barely had time to register his shock before Thomas unleashed his next move. With a thunderous shout, Thomas summoned an incredible gravitational force, pulling everything around him toward the center like a powerful black hole. Hunters and shadow soldiers alike were dragged helplessly toward the massive hunter, their screams filling the air. Jinwoo, feeling the overwhelming pull, managed to resist by using Ruler's authority, leaping back to avoid being drawn in. He knew that without his own ability, he would have been sucked in like the others. Thomas wasn't finished. He unleashed another devastating blow with his Demolish skill. The shockwave exploded outward with incredible force, sending both allies and enemies flying in every direction. The screams of hunters echoed through the area as they were swept away by the impact. Chaos reigned as the battlefield was torn apart. The Vice Guild Master, realizing the danger, shouted for the hunters to move away from Thomas, urging the wounded to be dragged to safety. 3 or 4 agile hunters quickly moved, pulling their injured comrades away from the center of destruction. Amid the chaos, Jinwoo leaped again, narrowly dodging another powerful strike from Thomas. The force of the blow created a deep crater in the ground where Thomas now stood. Jinwoo, quick to react, landed on top of the rubble, crouching just in time to avoid further damage. Thomas stood tall in the deep hole, his eyes burning with fury as he locked onto Jinwoo. His rage boiled over, and without hesitation, he charged toward Jinwoo with terrifying speed. As a national-level hunter, Thomas considered himself a king, and in his mind, Jinwoo had to be punished for daring to challenge him. However, as Thomas reached his target, Jinwoo met him with a powerful kick, stamping down on his head with brute force. The impact sent Thomas crashing down, but Jinwoo wasn't done. He followed, descending toward his opponent with relentless intent. In midair, Thomas stretched out his hand, activating his capture skill once more, creating a massive gravitational pull aimed at dragging Jinwoo toward him. Yet Jinwoo didn't evade. Instead, he used Ruler's authority to accelerate his own momentum, closing the distance between them even faster. Thomas, momentarily bewildered, realized Jinwoo was planning to meet him head-on. His eyes widened in disbelief. Jinwoo was not avoiding the attack, but was instead pulling Thomas toward him with greater force. Thomas activated reinforcement again, his muscles swelling as his strength increased. Their fists collided with a thunderous explosion of mana, the impact so fierce that it shattered Thomas's armor. Despite his immense power, Jinwoo ducked under Thomas's punch and countered with his own devastating strike. Thomas was sent flying like a missile, crashing through the factory towers and carving a deep trench in the ground as he skidded to a stop. Jinwoo landed smoothly on his feet, his eyes cold and focused. Thomas roared in pain, his body bruised and battered from the impact as he struggled to rise. But Jinwoo wasn't done yet. Without hesitation, he dashed forward once more. Thomas, struggling to push himself up, was met with Jinwoo standing directly in front of him. Roaring in anger, Thomas swung his fist with all his might. Each swing tore through the air, creating shockwaves powerful enough to leave holes in the ground. His strikes were deadly, capable of destroying an opponent without making contact. But Jinwoo evaded each of Thomas's powerful strikes, his agility unmatched. In the blink of an eye, Jinwoo retaliated, his blows landing with pinpoint accuracy on Thomas's vulnerable spots. Knee after knee crashed into Thomas with unrelenting force. The tension in the air grew thick, each strike sounding louder than the last as Jinwoo's attacks became an unstoppable storm. Meanwhile, several cars screeched to a halt at a safe distance from the battlefield, where the intense clash between two overwhelming forces unfolded. Inside one of the vehicles, Brent, an S-rank hunter, sensed the immense magical energy radiating from the scene. The sheer magnitude of power made it clear that the combatants were far beyond ordinary hunters. The danger was palpable, and Brent braced himself for what was to come. Suddenly, a figure was hurled into the sky and crashed violently back to the ground, sending tremors through the area. Adam's expression turned pale as he recognized what had just happened. It was Thomas Andre, one of the most powerful hunters in the world, now thrown aside with force unimaginable. Brent, filled with disbelief, struggled to comprehend the situation. He realized that something had to be done, but the overwhelming power displayed on the battlefield left him uncertain. Both Brent and Adam were stunned by the realization that Thomas Andre, a national-level hunter known for his unparalleled strength, was being overpowered by none other than Hunter Sung Jinwoo. As his body endured the relentless onslaught, doubts crept into his mind. The idea of losing felt impossible. His sheer violence and raw raw power were what defined him, and yet here he was being overpowered. Blood stained his teeth as he clenched his jaw in fury, madness flaring in his eyes. His body was battered, but Jinwoo didn't relent. His fist landed squarely on Thomas's chin, sending a tremor through his body. Even as Thomas shook his head, trying to recover, Jinwoo was already there, relentless, unstoppable. Blows rained down on Thomas, striking his most vulnerable spots with pinpoint accuracy. Each punch felt like a hammer, shattering the unbreakable fortress that was Thomas Andre. The mighty Goliath began to falter, staggering under the sheer weight of Jinwoo's unyielding assault. But even as he stumbled, Thomas roared in defiance. "I am Thomas Andre! You can't take me down!" Jinwoo didn't flinch. His cold gaze never wavered. "I told you, didn't I? It doesn't matter who you are." With a powerful elbow, Jinwoo struck the top of Thomas's head, hammering the towering figure down. Jinwoo's attacks were relentless, and Thomas could barely withstand the assault. Blood sprayed with each hit, and it became evident that the once invincible Thomas was crumbling under the weight of Jinwoo's sheer force. At that moment, Adam rushed onto the scene, desperate to intervene. His cry echoed across the battlefield, begging for the fight to stop. Jinwoo, however, showed no sign of halting as he continued his barrage, his face cold and focused, driven by rage. Each strike from Jinwoo sent Thomas reeling, his once mighty body unable to withstand the relentless blows. Just as Jinwoo charged up another devastating punch, ready to finish the fight, Thomas, barely conscious, parted his lips and admitted defeat. His body went limp as he acknowledged that the battle was over. With that, Jinwoo halted his attack, his fist hovering in the air before he finally lowered it. Standing silently over the defeated Thomas, onlookers were left speechless, witnessing the state of Thomas Andre. The great national-level hunter, a symbol of overwhelming strength, was reduced to such a broken figure. The sight was incomprehensible to many. How many hunters in the world could achieve this? Was there anyone else who could? As the realization set in, one thing was clear. Once this news spread, it would send shockwaves across the globe. Adam White quickly called for healers. One of the highest ranking healers rushed to Thomas's side, checking his vitals before casting healing magic. His expression darkened as he assessed the damage. Thomas's body was utterly wrecked, every bone broken, blood loss severe. The healer realized that his efforts alone wouldn't suffice. He called for the others to help. More healers joined in, working together to revive Thomas. They marveled at how he had lasted this long. The sheer resilience of Thomas Andre was the only reason he was still alive. Any other hunter would have died multiple times over from such catastrophic injuries. While the healers worked, the rest of the Hunter Command Center staff was busy evacuating the wounded from the destroyed factory. The elite hunters of the Scavenger Guild were in terrible condition, many crying out in pain. Some had broken limbs, while others were barely conscious. The aftermath of the battle was brutal. Amidst the chaos, Adam White watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart. As far as things could have gone, this might have been the best possible outcome. Thomas was alive, but the devastation was undeniable. A voice called out to him, pulling Adam from his thoughts. Adam groaned, anticipating more bad news. A hunter approached, face pale, delivering a grim update. Hwang Dong-soo wasn't breathing, his heart no longer beating. Adam's gaze swept across the scene, but something else troubled him. There was no sign of Hunter Sung Jinwoo. He had vanished, leaving behind the wreckage of a battle that would forever change the landscape of the hunter worlds. In Seoul, Korea, there was a 14-hour difference between the east coast of the United States. Jinwoo sat quietly on top of a tall building, overlooking the city below. He had used Shadow Exchange to swap locations with Baru, allowing him to return to Korea. It had been some time since Jinwoo had been back, and he took a moment to absorb the familiar sights of Seoul. Meanwhile, in America, Baru was busy healing Jinho to the best of his abilities. Jinwoo had left that important task in Baru's capable hands, while he handled matters in Korea. After some time passed, one of Jinwoo's shadow soldiers spoke up, catching Jinwoo's attention. The shadow soldier, who knelt before him, was at the level of a knight commander, the first rank. Jinwoo shifted his gaze towards him, curious about what he had to say. The soldier requested a name from Jinwoo, humbly asking for the honor of being bestowed one. Jinwoo briefly considered the request and thought back to the circumstances of the soldier's death. The soldier who had once been Hwang Dong-soo, and what led to his demise was his greed. With a small, bitter smile, Jinwoo decided on the name. Since greed had been the reason for his downfall, Jinwoo chose to name him Greed. It seemed fitting to remind the former Hwang Dong-soo of his past. The newly named Greed thanked Jinwoo for the honor and bowed his head once more, fully submitting to Jinwoo's command. Jinwoo calmly ordered him to return his head to the ground, signaling that the conversation had come to an end. With that, Jinwoo turned his attention back to the cityscape of Seoul, preparing for whatever was to come next. The next day, nearly every broadcast station and newspaper in the United States covered the hunters attending the International Guild Conference. Jinwoo, now a central figure in the event, was escorted by Adam past a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing, and questions being shouted from all directions. Reporters had caught wind of the fierce battle between Jinwoo and Thomas Andre, making it impossible for him to avoid the spotlight that day. As they approached the waiting car, Adam was focused on ensuring Jinwoo's safe passage. The Hunter Bureau had already secured testimony from Hwang Dong-soo's party, and it was only a matter of time before the truth of the incident was revealed to the public. Yet, Jinwoo's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't interested in the chaos surrounding Hwang Dong-soo any longer. His sole purpose for coming to America was clear, and once his questions were answered, he had no intention of staying. When they arrived at the conference building, Adam prepared to assist him by translating the presentation through an earpiece. The moment Jinwoo stepped inside, the atmosphere changed, conversations ceased, and all eyes turned toward him. Some of the hunters and officials in attendance watched him with curiosity, while others looked on with fear. Thomas Andre, once regarded as an unbeatable king among hunters, had been brought to the brink of defeat by Jinwoo, the mysterious Asian hunter who had shocked the entire world. The air was thick with tension. Everyone in the room was buzzing with speculation about the man who had taken down the Scavenger Guild, but not a single person dared to approach Jinwoo. There was a palpable sense of awe and uncertainty as they tried to comprehend the power he had displayed. Jinwoo, however, remained focused and calm. As the conference began, one of the speakers, Dr. Belzer, stepped onto the stage. He was well known in the field and had everyone's full attention. Dr. Belzer greeted the audience and introduced himself, quickly moving into the topic that had drawn the world's top hunters and officials together. Dr. Belzer explained that the number of gates being generated across the world had surged, and with it, stronger monsters had started to appear. What most people were unaware of, however, was the unusual activity that had been detected above the skies. It wasn't just the gates and monsters anymore. There was something happening in the atmosphere. The magical energy concentration in the air was increasing dramatically. As he spoke, Dr. Belzer referred to this new phenomenon with a term he had coined, the Magosphere. It was a fitting name for the strange and growing presence of magical energy in the atmosphere, though he noted that they might find a more accurate term in the future. He turned toward a large world map displayed on the screen behind him, using a laser pointer to indicate several locations where this energy was most concentrated. He revealed that the Magosphere was gathering above the skies of 9 different places around the world. The phenomenon had been observed in various countries, but one location stood out more than any other: Seoul, South Korea. The moment he mentioned Seoul, all eyes in the room shifted toward Jinwoo. The hunters and officials began murmuring to each other, their attention fixed on him. Dr. Belzer reassured the crowd, saying that there was no need to stare at Jinwoo. If Jinwoo were somehow responsible for the gathering of the Magosphere, then he would be beyond the power of an ordinary hunter. Jinwoo, deep in thought, considered the 9 locations. Could these spots be related to the number of monarchs, the powerful entities connected to him and the world? Dr. Belzer continued, acknowledging that the cause of the Magosphere remained unknown, and because of that, there was currently no way to deal with it. But just because they didn't understand it didn't mean it wasn't important. A great change could be looming over the world, and they needed to prepare for whatever was coming. As the scheduled program came to an end, Mr. David Brannon, the director of the Hunter Command Center, took the stage for an urgent announcement. His tone was somber and the atmosphere in the room shifted as he prepared to deliver distressing news. David Brannon addressed the gathered hunters, revealing that around 2 weeks ago, Christopher Reed, one of the world's strongest hunters, had been assassinated by a group of unidentified assailants. This revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. The fact that someone of Reed's immense power could be killed was terrifying to the hunters present. It raised troubling questions. Among the whispers in the crowd, many wondered who could be strong enough to kill a national-level hunter like Reed. Some even speculated if the culprit might be the same person who fought Thomas Andre the day before, drawing uneasy connections in their minds. David Brannon presented more information on the screen. He informed the audience that the news of Christopher Reed's death would be made public the following day. However, the hunters were asked to listen carefully, as there was already a suspect in mind for this heinous crime. Brannon pressed a button on the remote, changing the image on the screen, which immediately captured Jinwoo's attention. The face on the screen narrowed his focus as he observed the image intently. David Brandon explained that this individual, labeled as Suspect S, was the prime suspect in the murder of Christopher Reed. The hunters in the crowd, still processing the news, found themselves perplexed by the image. Although it wasn't Sung Jinwoo who was being accused, though the suspect bore a striking resemblance to Hunter Sung Jinwoo who was seated in the room, thoughts raced through their minds. The hunters couldn't help but compare the suspect's face to someone they could see nearby, but hesitated, telling themselves it was just a coincidence. They tried to dismiss the resemblance, but no matter how much they tried, the similarity seemed too close to ignore. Jinwoo's gaze locked onto the photograph displayed on the screen, his expression hardening as he recognized the resemblance. The image looked unmistakably like his father. Deep in thought, Jinwoo couldn't help but recall something critical. Dungeons were the domain of the rulers, a fact that was now entangled with his father's sudden appearance. His memory flashed back to a conversation with Kamish, the dragon from earlier. There were 4 humans who borrowed the strength of the rulers. Be wary of them, my king. The words echoed in his mind. Jinwoo pondered the possibility. Why would the ruler send a being resembling his father? Could it be tied to what Kamish had mentioned? Meanwhile, director David Brandon continued speaking, providing crucial information. According to the Hunter Association's investigation, the man found inside a gate in the US had been identified as a humanoid monster capable of speaking the human language. In an effort to negotiate, S-rank hunter Hwang Dong-soo, who spoke Korean, had been called in to lead the questioning. But the situation had gone terribly wrong. The monster had overpowered Hwang Dong-soo, defeated him, and brought the entire Hunters Association headquarters to flames. As David spoke, footage of Suspect S standing over Hwang Dong-soo's broken body, stepping on his neck, played on the screen behind him. Jinwoo's attention was razor sharp as he watched. The suspect appeared to be speaking to Dong-soo in the footage. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes, focusing intently. Time seemed to slow down as he sharpened his perception, like he often did in battle. With his heightened senses, Jinwoo read the suspect's lips. The words sent a chill through him. Don't ever set foot in Korea. I say this not for my son's sake, but for your own. You won't be able to close your eyes, even in death. A silent confirmation came from his soldier, Greed, who answered the unspoken question lingering in Jinwoo's mind. It was as he suspected. There could be no mistake. The man on the screen, the one labeled as Suspect S, was indeed Jinwoo's father. David Brandon, standing at the podium, announced the next steps. The Hunter Association planned to request assistance from all guilds worldwide to apprehend Suspect S. He urged everyone to contact them immediately if any sighting occurred. Questions began to rise from the hunters in the audience. One hunter asked whether there was any proof that Suspect S was not human. David explained that the suspect's magic emission completely matched that of a monster, leaving no room for doubt. Another hunter raised a different question, pointing out that Suspect S claimed to be a human who went missing in a dungeon. They wanted to know if the hunter he described had actually existed. David confirmed that the individual was indeed real. Then came the delicate question about why the identity of Suspect S wasn't being revealed to the public. David hesitated briefly before revealing that Suspect S was connected to one of the hunters present in the room. As a result, the association had chosen not to disclose his identity at this time. A hunter from the last row raised his hand, insisting that it might be more useful to reveal the identity of Suspect S in order to aid in his arrest. The hunter who spoke was none other than Liu Zhigang from China, a 7-star and national level hunter. He directed his question to the chief directly, asking what connection Suspect S had to Hunter Sung Jinwoo. David, realizing the seriousness of the question, finally gave in. During the questioning, Suspect S had revealed himself to be Sung Jinwoo's father. The association was conducting their investigation with that information in mind. The room erupted in shock. Hunters murmured and gasped, unable to process the revelation that the first humanoid magic beast emerging from a dungeon had taken the form of Jinwoo's missing father. The disbelief in the air was palpable. Liu Zhigang, intrigued, asked Jinwoo directly what he would do if hunters tried to take down his father. Jinwoo considered his response carefully. He calmly replied that if Suspect S turned out to be a monster, it was only right that hunters hunt monsters. And if it were true, he would personally take care of him. But if Suspect S was not a monster and truly his father, Jinwoo's stance would change completely. With cold determination, Jinwoo vowed that if his father was truly innocent and anyone tried to harm him, he would not hesitate to hunt those hunters down. As the conference came to an end, Jinwoo joined the after party. Adam White, standing beside him, asked if he meant what he had said earlier during the meeting. Jinwoo, with no hesitation, confirmed that he did. Adam couldn't help but marvel at the statement, reflecting that only 2 hunters in the entire world would dare to say something like that in front of 500 of the strongest hunters from over 120 countries, Jinwoo and one other. Curious, Jinwoo asked who the other hunter was. Adam pointed out that the other person was currently in the hospital, referring to Thomas Andre. He then informed Jinwoo about the upcoming feast that had been meticulously organized by the Hunters Association. Adam suggested that if Jinwoo wasn't too busy, he could join the other hunters for dinner. As the two continued talking, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Liu Zhigang, one of the most powerful hunters, and his subordinates approached Jinwoo. The entire room quieted, sensing the tension building between them. Liu Zhigang took a step forward and spoke in Chinese, his words causing Jinwoo to listen carefully. Jinwoo's expression remained serious as he turned to Adam, asking what Zhigang had said. Adam quickly translated, explaining that Liu Zhigang claimed to have caught a giant monster that Jinwoo had allowed to escape on the coast of China. Jinwoo, now intrigued, asked Adam if he knew how to speak Chinese as well. Adam smiled and reminded Jinwoo that being in charge of the Asia branch, he had learned all the Asian languages quite well. Liu Zhigang continued speaking, clearly having much he wanted to say to Jinwoo. Jinwoo asked Adam to keep translating the conversation. Adam relayed Liu's words, explaining that Liu had been surprised by the strength of the giant monster he had fought. The battle had been especially challenging since it took place on water, making it even more difficult. Liu Zhigang mentioned that he had wanted to meet Jinwoo for a long time, curious about the hunter capable of taking down such powerful creatures with ease. He also expressed satisfaction that Jinwoo had put Thomas Andre in his place, saying he had no doubt that Thomas had been in the wrong. As Jinwoo listened, he reflected that his first impression of Liu Zhigang had been that he was just a grumpy man. But after hearing these words, Jinwoo reconsidered and found him to be a more interesting person than he initially thought. The two men shook hands, a brief but meaningful gesture, before releasing their grip. However, the atmosphere shifted as Liu's expression grew more serious. Adam continued translating, revealing that Liu hoped Suspect S wasn't someone related to Jinwoo's family. With that, Liu Zhigang and his subordinates walked away, leaving behind a brief but impactful interaction. Adam reassured Jinwoo that Liu didn't seem to harbor any ill intent and mentioned that Liu had said he never wanted to fight Jinwoo. Jinwoo remained calm, replying that it was alright, showing no sign of concern. As they continued, a newcomer entered the room. This person had a noticeable presence, but strangely there was no magic power emanating from them. It was David Brennan, the director of the Hunter Bureau. He addressed Jinwoo and asked if he could spare some time for a discussion. David seemed pleased with himself, leading the way while Jinwoo quietly followed. As they walked, Jinwoo sensed another presence in the room. To his surprise, he had not expected to see this person again. It was Miss Norma Selner, known as the Upgrader. Her appearance left Jinwoo confused, wondering what she could possibly want from him this time. Miss Selner greeted Jinwoo, and though Jinwoo maintained his calm outwardly, his thoughts raced. He acknowledged her presence, still unsure of her purpose. Miss Selner then revealed that she had been having recurring dreams. In these dreams, she saw top hunters being hunted down by someone, and disturbingly, a few days after each dream, those events would become reality. She had foreseen these hunters' deaths in her dreams. Jinwoo understood the gravity of what she was saying and asked if Christopher Reed was among those hunters. David confirmed that they had indeed warned Christopher Reed about the danger, but he had not listened to their caution, and they all knew how things had ended for him. Miss Selner continued by explaining that powerful hunters, the ones who had been supporting and protecting their world, were going to continue dying. The force hunting them down would not stop until they were all eliminated. Jinwoo began to piece together the seriousness of the situation and questioned whether Ms. Selner was here to warn him about the same fate. However, Ms. Selner clarified her purpose. She was not there to warn Jinwoo about his own danger, but rather to ask for his help. She wanted Jinwoo to protect the remaining hunters who were still alive. Jinwoo, though outwardly composed, was left confused by her request. She explained that she had been trying to remember the faces of the hunters who were being hunted in her dreams, but her efforts had been in vain. Realizing this, she had decided to try a different approach. She wanted to use her ability within the dreams to confirm their identities. Jinwoo thought back to their last encounter and realized that this was why Ms. Selner had looked into his eyes back then. She had been searching for something. Ms. Selner revealed that when she looked into his eyes, she had come into contact with a powerful force within him, something vast and endless. The moment she encountered this power, she was abruptly forced to wake from her sleep. Ms. Selner, with her hand trembling slightly, recalled the experience vividly. She remembered hearing a voice from the powerful entity she had seen when their eyes locked. The voice had told her to go back and prepare for the war. As she recalled this, she shuddered, feeling the intensity of the memory. Jinwoo's mind raced, piecing together the information. He remembered the battle between the rulers and monarchs, something that the King of Giants had spoken of. He wondered which side the hunter's killers belonged to, trying to connect the dots between Ms. Selner's dream and the looming war between these powerful beings. Still unsure of how it all connected, Jinwoo asked why Ms. Selner had asked him specifically to protect the hunters. She responded by explaining that she had detected a similar power within him, one that matched the power from her dreams. Jinwoo realized what she was referring to. Ms. Selner must have seen the power of the Shadow Monarch within him during their previous encounter. Jinwoo's thoughts deepened as he considered the implications. If the same power from the hunters in her dreams was the power of the monarchs, then those responsible for hunting down the hunters must also be monarchs. This revelation connected the dots for Jinwoo, giving him more insight into the threat that was unfolding around him. David spoke up, explaining that the threat they faced was beyond the capabilities of ordinary hunters. These beings were far more powerful, and they needed Jinwoo's immense strength to stop them. He admitted that at first, they were not entirely convinced that Jinwoo was the only one who could protect the remaining hunters. However, their opinion changed after witnessing the battle between Jinwoo and Hunter Andre the previous day. The display of Jinwoo's strength had left a lasting impression. David continued by offering compensation in exchange for Jinwoo's help. He mentioned that they were willing to give Jinwoo anything he wanted, even the greatest treasure left behind by the dragon Kamish, the Rune Stone. He explained that there were hunters in the world who had received powerful blessings and used their abilities to support and protect humanity. If these hunters were to disappear, the world would be left vulnerable and unable to last against future threats. Jinwoo, after hearing David's plea, made his decision. He firmly declined the offer. His refusal was unexpected and left the director shocked, as he had hoped to convince Jinwoo with the promise of such valuable rewards. David, still surprised, asked if Jinwoo's rejection was due to any lingering personal grudges against Hunter Andre after their recent battle. However, Jinwoo made it clear that this was not the reason. The real issue was that he still did not fully understand who he was supposed to be fighting against. Without that knowledge, he could not commit to taking action. With his decision made, Jinwoo stood up from his seat, ready to leave. The conversation had run its course, and he needed more information before taking any further action. As he walked out, a grim thought crossed Adam's mind. He recalled the statement Jinwoo had made during the conference, how he had vowed to protect his family even if it meant becoming an enemy to every hunter in the world. Suddenly, Jinwoo stopped for a moment, contemplating the weight of his words. Breaking the silence, Jinwoo called out, "Agent White!" Adam, caught off guard, turned to him. Jinwoo requested the list of hunters the Bureau had wanted him to protect. He also asked if Adam could arrange a meeting with those hunters. Adam, delighted by the request, eagerly agreed to make the arrangements. The final day of the International Guild Conference, hosted by the Hunters Association, had arrived. This evening was called the Night of the Hunters, and the banquet hall was filled with the world's most powerful hunters and their entourages. Jinwoo's loyal companion, Jinho, had returned from the hospital and joined him at the event. Jinwoo asked Jinho how he was feeling, and Jinho, full of gratitude and emotion, responded, "Good as new, boss." Tears welled up in Jinho's eyes as he admitted how moved he was when he heard that Jinwoo had fought the mighty Thomas Andre, the Goliath, to protect him. Meanwhile, other hunters gathered nearby, watching Jinwoo closely. They marveled at how they couldn't even sense his presence despite standing right in front of him. To them, Jinwoo was on an entirely different level, and they soon realized that the man beside him, Jinho, must have been the one Jinwoo fought Thomas Andre to save. The awe and admiration in the room were palpable, as they witnessed firsthand the bond between Jinwoo and Jinho, and the power that radiated from Jinwoo without a word. One of the guests approached Jinwoo, introducing himself as the CEO of a global corporation that specialized in dealing with monster remains. He expressed his interest in purchasing all the giant monsters that Jinwoo had hunted and asked if Jinwoo had a moment to discuss the matter. Jinwoo, however, clarified that he was mainly in charge of raids and battles, while his vice chairman handled all business-related matters. Jinwoo gestured to Jinho, who introduced himself as Ahjin Guild's vice chairman, Jinho. Jinho, now more confident in his role, greeted the CEO and mentioned that he usually did not talk business in such informal settings. However, for this particular situation, he made an exception, ready to handle the deal. Jinwoo observed Jinho's professionalism and felt proud of how far his friend had come, acknowledging that Jinho was now truly fulfilling his role as a proper vice chairman. Meanwhile, Adam approached Jinwoo with a list of hunters, ranked by points assigned based on their contributions and activity. He explained that the 10 hunters listed were the top ranked, and if Jinwoo accepted their proposal, he would likely be asked to protect these individuals. Jinwoo quickly grasped the importance of these hunters, realizing that they were considered high priority targets. Adam continued to explain that Jinwoo himself ranked highly in terms of hunter points, likely falling in the 3rd or 4th position, largely due to the giant monsters he had taken down. The highest ranked hunters were Thomas Andre, followed by Liu Jigang in 2nd, Christopher Reed in 3rd, and Siddharth in 4th place. As Jinwoo processed this information, he found it tedious to memorize all the names of the top hunters. He thought to himself that it would be much easier to place shadow soldiers on each of them for protection, rather than keeping track of their identities. The environment seemed ideal for deploying shadow soldiers, and Jinwoo realized this strategy would help him in his larger mission. By shadowing these hunters, he could contact the rulers through them, allowing him to discern who was a friend and who was an enemy. This way, Jinwoo could better understand who he needed to fight in the impending conflict. Suddenly, a noise interrupted Jinwoo's focus on the list in front of him. It was caused by the presence of someone approaching. Jinwoo's attention shifted as he heard his name being called by Jim Chul, but Jinwoo reassured him, telling him not to worry about the situation. The source of the noise was none other than Thomas Andre, who soon stood before Jinwoo. Thomas had a question for him. He explained that his arm, damaged during their previous battle, had not fully healed. Despite the healer's best efforts, the damage from Jinwoo's immense magic power was too severe for healing magic to work. Even the doctors had confirmed that while the arm was slowly recovering, it was far from complete recovery. Thomas, reflecting on their battle, acknowledged that Jinwoo could have easily wiped out his entire guild after defeating him. Yet despite all the chaos that had unfolded, none of his guild members had died, except for Hwang Dong-soo, who had been the cause of the conflict. Thomas was curious as to why Jinwoo had shown such restraint and allowed them to live. Jinwoo, calm and composed, responded that Thomas and his guild had not committed any sin that deserved death. This reasoning satisfied Thomas, who seemed to understand the gravity of Jinwoo's words. He expressed his intention to hold a grand funeral for Hwang Dong-soo, the man who had caused the chaos, acknowledging that Hwang had committed a sin that deserved death. Despite this, Thomas hoped to give him a proper farewell. Before leaving, he made one final request. Once his arm healed, he wished to have a meal with Jinwoo and asked him to leave his contact information with his manager so they could arrange it in the future. With that, Thomas turned and left the banquet hall without looking back, leaving Jinwoo to continue with the matters at hand. Laura watched as Thomas Andre walked away, then turned to face Jinwoo. She explained that her master had just shown his gratitude toward Jinwoo for sparing his guild members. Despite Thomas's imposing presence, she revealed that he was actually quite shy. Laura then politely asked Jinwoo for his contact information, explaining that Thomas wished to give him a gift as a token of gratitude. She added that if there was anything Jinwoo wanted, he should let her know. Jinwoo initially declined, saying that he didn't need anything. However, Laura persisted, mentioning that her master was a competitive man who felt uneasy owing favors to others. She encouraged Jinwoo to name something, no matter how simple, to ease Thomas's mind. After a brief moment of thought, Jinwoo finally agreed, mentioning that a useful dagger might be a fitting gift. Laura nodded, appreciating his understanding, and then excused herself from the banquet hall, following after Thomas. As soon as Laura left, Adam approached Jinwoo, suggesting they meet and greet the hunters on the list. He offered to guide Jinwoo through the introductions, but Jinwoo declined, saying there was no need for such formality. Jinwoo, scanning the list again, noticed something odd and asked Adam about the 6th ranked hunter, pointing out that the person was missing. Adam looked surprised and admitted that they had lost contact with the 6th ranked hunter a few days before the conference. Despite the efforts of the secret agency and the Brazilian government, they had yet to locate him. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes. Considering the situation, he wondered if this hunter had already been taken down. That left only 7 people on the list, which narrowed down Jinwoo's priorities even further. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching!